Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, Seeing It Through. Just days ago, Israel finally banned imported kosher meat processed under inhumane shackle and hoist methods. A PETA undercover investigator recalls how she got and endured the footage she caught on camera.
There's plenty of distractions to just make you want to get the footage and not fall down and, keep everything moving forward. You're walking through and like, oh, okay, here's where they cut their feet off, the hooves, and here's where they peel their skins off, and here are all the disembodied tongues. So it is a house of horrors. But of course, that's not the part we're focused on. We're focused on what is the animal experiencing when he or she is alive.
What PETA investigator Hannah Schein and her husband Philip saw in 3 undercover investigations that began in 2007 finally changed the laws on imported kosher meat to Israel. A new ban on inhumane shackle and hoist methods is now on the books, but kosher meat using those methods is still coming in from South America to other countries, including the U.S., and it's likely processed meats like your kosher beef hot dogs came from cows that were killed using shackle and hoist methods. Hannah tells her story on the PETA Podcast. But first, thanks again for joining us for this episode of the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with your friends and let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. Go to our webpage at PETA.org and listen to all the episodes, including the first episode with PETA President and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk. On recent episodes, we talk about saving bears at roadside zoos, why no-kill shelters are dysfunctional, creating frustration as they only turn away animals, something PETA's CAP program doesn't do. And for fun, listen to the origins of the I'd Rather Be Naked Than Wear Fur campaign, as told by PETA's Senior VP, Dan Matthews. You can listen to all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, and while you're there, rate and review the show. It helps the algorithm know that PETA has a podcast on the issues important to you. And don't forget, you can always help by hitting that Donate Now button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, well, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. Hannah Schein and her husband Philip have gone undercover for PETA since 2004. And at the start of June, they actually saw the fruits of their labor. The laws on imported kosher meats were finally changed in Israel as that country banned meat slaughtered under the primitive shackle and hoist methods. The investigation took them to Uruguay and Paraguay. It was the video on PETA.org in 2016 that galvanized the public and ultimately forced lawmakers to act. You can see the video through the link on the podcast notes and at PETA.org. And now that Israel has changed its law, maybe an import ban should be placed on shackle and hoist kosher beef to the U.S. Hannah Schein recounts how the undercover investigation evolved, what she saw, how she filmed through the blood and sinew, and how she kept it from affecting her personally. But it's clear how the work with her husband Philip has made the world a better place for a few more animals. My conversation with Hannah Schein on the PETA Podcast.
I was raised kosher, and like many, people who eat kosher food and who are raised, with that, culturally, you are kind of indoctrinated with the idea that kosher is a kinder way to do things. It's cleaner. And as the famous Hebrew National ad used to say, we answer to a higher authority. So I think people assume, and kosher is much bigger than it used to be. I mean, I think I read that something like 60% of packaged products are actually supervised by kosher authorities now and certified. So there was this myth that kosher is kinder and that more inspections mean that everything's kind of on the up and up. And we were hearing from insiders in in the slaughter industries that there were some issues, particularly at a slaughterhouse called agri-processors. And we tried to have a dialogue behind the scenes with agri-processors, and they were really completely uninterested in making any humane improvements. So we actually decided to send an investigator in and see for ourselves.
And this is an undercover investigator.
We sent someone to work at the plant, and he got employed and was able to, even though he was working, it was a massive plant, so even though he was working in a different area, was able to go on breaks and other times to observe the cattle slaughter. And what he found with them, even though they were using kind of more modern slaughter technology, it was so poorly implemented, and they were doing such an egregious second cut, which is after the religious slaughterer cut the throats of the cattle, another person was coming in who was not, a religious slaughterer, not a Jewish person, was coming in with a hook and a knife and basically cutting out the entire throat of the cow and letting it dangle. So that caused, worldwide outrage, and that plant. I mean, I could go for an hour just on the agri-processors case. People have written books about this company, but how that led to Shackle and Hoist is that we heard from industry experts that as bad as that was, that there were plants in other countries who were doing much more primitive slaughter in ways that caused tremendous animal suffering.
And they were exporting the meat to Israel and other places, or just Israel?
Yes, actually, first we focused on plants that we're exporting to the United States, like plants in Uruguay, which is where we first went, and we showed that cows were, since they weren't being restrained in a mechanical pen like they were at agri-processors, it took a team of men to basically wrestle them to the ground and chain their legs, and then they used really painful-looking metal tools to pin the cow's head to the ground so that the slaughterer could come and make the cut. And this involved a tool called a devil's fork, which is, it looks like a pitchfork essentially, but with the middle tine much shorter. And they would basically use that to pin the cow's head against the ground and then wrench it back so that the throat was exposed. And after we went public with that video, the chief rabbinate in Israel agreed that this was inhumane, and they would try to take steps to stop it. But cut to 2 years later, they had not done anything to stop that Shackle and Hoist slaughter. And so we actually went back to another slaughterhouse in Uruguay that we knew did Shackle and Hoist from industry experts that we'd heard from about this really archaic process. And we were able to get footage of these really arduous slaughters that required teams of people to knock down the cows and pin them into position for the slaughterer to make his ritual cut. And a lot of people, when they think of kosher, they think that things are going to be more supervised and more clean and more humane, but they don't really know where, when beef is coming from other countries, there's not the same level of oversight as we have, in some ways in the United States.
Shackle and Hoist, it sounds not so great. It sounds like it shouldn't be used in the same sentence as the word kosher. But what did you find in your investigation of the beef industry or the meat industry in South America that sent a lot of its beef to Israel? What did you find?
We found that rather than using kind of a more modern immobilizing pen to keep the cows in the position that would, cause the least amount of stress, everything was the opposite of how people, for example, like Temple Grandin, would say things should be done. So, in an ideal world, nobody would be eating cows. But in an ideal slaughter world, the cows would be calm and they would be not mishandled or electric prodded. And after their throats are cut, they'd be allowed to pass out and then they could be disassembled. But in actuality, what we found in South America was that, they didn't use these restraint pens. So they just had to have teams of workers using painful metal tools and chains, basically trying to knock down the cow. What we saw was, teams of people working to, immobilize the cows physically, manually with hand tools and with chains. And, it's really disturbing.
Hannah, this is really quite an achievement that after an investigation, you really are able to live and see the day that you've reached the goal and the laws have changed. Like, for example, this Shackle and Hoist law in Israel is now it's part of the law in Israel, right? After the investigation.
It is. And I really think it shows the power of public response and taking action on our action alerts. We had, I think, over 150,000 people, and at last count, and that was in 2017, who wrote in to the government of Israel and said, I have seen this footage and this needs to stop. And Israel had some things on the books where they didn't allow shackle and hoist in the country to be done at slaughterhouses in Israel, but they were still kind of a loophole where they were still allowing the imports. And unfortunately, 80% or more of Israeli beef was coming from outside the country. So, a huge portion of the beef that was coming in was being shackled and hoisted as a means of slaughter.
And all this meat is going to Israel and other places as kosher, right?
So we appealed to the kosher authorities. We appealed to the chief rabbi in Israel to say, hey, this is what's going on at kosher slaughterhouses in South America. Can you please do something about, this cruelty? And, I'll read you one of the headlines. They actually said that, big headline, rabbinate to phase out shackle and hoist animal slaughter. So we really thought, hey, we did it. This is going to stop now. But 2 years later, we saw that it had not stopped. So we went back to Uruguay and went to yet another slaughterhouse, a much bigger one this time. And this one actually was a big exporter to the United States. Alley Processing got a lot of meat from this Las Piedras plant. And, essentially we saw the same thing. Shackle and hoist still being used, cattle still being wrestled around with chains and being pinned to the floor so their throats could be cut. So, again, headlines read, Israel's chief rabbi to mark imported beef unkosher if slaughtering process not changed. So they paid pretty good lip service to the idea of making improvements, but we did not see any concrete change after that.
Now, what would happen if people who were eating this meat under essentially false pretenses, thinking it was kosher, but in fact it wasn't? What are the ramifications there?
Well, I mean, the meat was still kosher because the technicalities of kashrut were still observed. It's other Jewish principles that were being violated, like sa'ar ba'alei chayim, which is not causing unnecessary pain to animals. So, it- you know, people though don't have the opportunity to see normally if something like that is going on. So when they do see it, they might decide, well, that might be technically kosher, but I don't want to support it. And that really is the goal of our investigations, is while we are trying to eliminate the worst abuses and to reduce animal suffering, we also want people to see these videos and think, you know what? I don't need to support that at all. I'm going to go eat some Gardein or some Beyond Meat, and I don't need to support that industry at all. So, while we are trying to make these, humane improvements and, make these processes less torturous for animals, obviously the goal is to have people wash their hands of it and say, I can eat in a more compassionate way anyway. So I don't, this isn't for me.
Yeah, I was I felt really privileged to be able to be part of the investigation, if only as the voice on the videos that were the final product that people saw. But what was the impact when people saw these videos? What kind of reaction did you get? We saw how Israel reacted and how governments reacted, but how did
Right.
consumers and other people react when they saw that this is what was going on with Shackle and Hoist?
Yeah. I don't think most Americans knew that Shackle and Hoisted meat was still coming into the United States when we exposed this. They didn't understand that pretty much all of the packaged meat, the kosher meat in the United States, we're talking like salami, hot dogs, any processed meat was probably coming from South America, and only kind of products like steaks and bigger cuts were coming from American slaughterhouses. So they didn't know that their kids were probably eating this meat. They were eating this meat that came from this kind of process where the welfare was completely being disregarded of the cow. So we really 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 wanted to get this stopped, and so we went back in 2016. This time we invited our colleagues from Anonymous for Animal Rights in Israel, which is another animal rights group that does great work. And we together sent a joint team of investigators to South America. And we were able to get footage inside Frigo Chaco, which is a big slaughterhouse in Paraguay. And also our teammates were able to get whistleblower footage from several plants in Argentina, in Uruguay, and Brazil. So we had you know, um, kind of a big joint effort, and it worked out really well because what we saw in Paraguay was so incredibly disturbing that, um, it really raised a ruckus among the community, and rightfully so.
When people look at the video, when you saw the video, I mean, you oversaw the investigation, but when you saw what was actually going on, what what was your reaction? What how did people how did they take in this image, the images of that video?
The 2016 investigation, what we saw in Paraguay was it's hard to watch. When we went into the Paraguay slaughterhouse and saw what was going on at Frigo Chaco, whenever you're in these situations, you're trying to think, okay, how can I best position myself to convey what's going on as clearly as possible to the public, and um, is my equipment catching these cows bellowing, and am I framing the action well enough that people can actually see what's going on here? So that's always the challenge. And actually in Frigo Chaco, we were ushered up a set of stairs that overlooked a pen where they would shock the cows into, and then kind of immobilize them so they could put the chains in their feet. And then the bottom of the box would drop out and swoosh them down onto the floor. And so from that angle, you could get the footage of the electric prodding, and they're struggling as they were restrained while they're being chained. But then we had to then reposition ourselves and get onto the kill floor again and get a better angle of the pinning of the animals. They were doing the same thing where teams of workers were then using metal tools to wrench the cows' heads against the floor. And these cows were different from ones we had seen before. They were both steers and heifers, it looked like, and a lot of them had horns, and they were a breed called Brangus, which is a kind of a hybrid between a Brahma and an Angus, and they had humps as well that are common for Brahma cattle. And so, um, wrenching their heads it looked like more even physically, painful for these cows, just the way their anatomy was arranged. And at this place, they used a nose hook, which was kind of like a handheld, nasty looking metal hook that they would use to pull the cows by their noses.
Hmm.
And that just looked just ridiculously painful. And then they would use the devil's fork to pin their heads. And then the slaughterer comes in, makes the cut, and kosher has its criticisms, but if everything else was optimized, the cut itself is not the issue. The issue is the massive mishandling before the cut to position the cow with manual, techniques and shackling and hoisting, and the cow is essentially hoisted up off the ground to do this maneuver, and then the head is pinned. If that were the only thing we saw, that would have been horrendous. But we saw even more than that. Because they didn't allow the cows to go unconscious after the cut, they were immediately hoisting them up into the air. And, it's been proven in studies that if you don't, handle the cattle after the cut, they'll go unconscious more quickly. And if they aren't super stressed before with all this handling and clanging and everything else, it's a much quicker process because they pass out more quickly. In this kind of situation, they're doing everything opposite of what you would need to have a quick death. And so when the cows are being hoisted and slid down this rail towards, teams of people who were starting to disassemble them, they were still conscious. And some of them were actually lifting their heads and, lifting their whole chest almost and trying to right themselves, even though they were being hung by one leg and were, completely suspended. So
they're wiggling around and they're
absolutely, some motions we've learned from consulting with experts are not indicative of consciousness, but some of them absolutely are, like lifting one's head, blinking one's eyes. And so, we're trained to try to observe that so that we can get the right footage to show experts, and they can make the determination of what's relevant and what violates handling standards and laws. So we were seeing this and then trying to get this video of this very hectic situation where on our left, cows are being shackled and hoisted, and on our right, they're being slid, and like the first worker would make a cut across the back of their head and then take a puntilla, which is a spike, and stab them in the spine right at the base of their skull. And we had never seen this before. And we went to Temple Grandin with this footage and said, what are we seeing here? And she said, because these cows are not unconscious, they're stabbing them in the spine to paralyze them and make them stop moving.
How are you dealing with this? I mean, you have to stay undercover, or let's just say, how are you dealing with these images when you see them? How are you staying sane, or how are you not losing it? Is I guess really the question I have.
As I'm in the moment, I'm more focused on whether all my cameras are working and my framing and my angles and, am I getting blood on the cameras and things like that. So it's thinking more like a movie director than the subject of a film, because after all, it's not about me anyway. It's about the animals. So you have to just suspend any kind of emotion, paste a smile on your face, or whatever is appropriate to the situation, and just roll with, getting whatever footage you can, because when I do an assignment like this, I don't have months to work at a facility every day and be able to catch something another time or see what's happening in the long term. I just have to make sure I get as much footage as I can at that moment. So yeah, it's hard, but you just, we've been doing this also since 2004, so it gets easier, but you just suspend everything and get the footage, and then we go to the experts and move on from there.
Yeah, and all the while, you're in an environment where I've been in plants before. I know what it sounds like. It's noisy. You hear this, you can probably hear animals screaming or the screeching. I mean, it's not like you're in a silent, soundproof room. And then there's blood and there's sinew and stuff just that must be
Yeah.
flying all over
Yeah.
the place.
Well, first of all, it's always soaking wet. These places always have very slick floors, and you're just trying to keep your ground and not fall down. And there's always intense noise and clanging. The cows are bellowing. Because they were being electric prodded. You have the smell. There's always, pretty vibrant smells in slaughterhouses. And, so there's a lot to focus on besides the sadness of the moment. So there's plenty of distractions to just make you want to get the footage and not fall down and, keep everything moving forward. You're walking through and like, oh, okay, here's where they cut their feet off, the hooves, and here's where they peel their skins off, and here are all the disembodied tongues. So it is a house of horrors. But of course, that's not the part we're focused on. We're focused on what is the animal experiencing when he or she is alive.
And you're speaking of this like a true soldier going through this, but at some point it has to come back and impact you some way. You don't have any PTSD issues or anything like that, do you?
I don't. I don't criticize people who do feel that way, but what I'm witnessing is a drop in the bucket compared to what the animals are going through. So I I really don't think this is about us. I feel much more. I mean, I feel like I'm doing whatever I can to the best of my ability to make this stop and to reduce animal suffering. So I think I would, knowing that all this goes on, uh, I wouldn't sleep as well at night if I weren't on the front lines trying to get it changed.
You're seeing something that you want the whole world to see, right?
Right, and I take comfort in the knowledge that PETA and the people working to publicize these investigations are going to do the most effective work that they can do in terms of going to the experts and meeting with people in the industry and getting media exclusives and really making crack video edits that blow up on social media. I know that we have the team in place so that whatever our people see undercover is never for naught. It's always going to be used as as efficiently as we can, and as you know I know we're going to make an impact. So yeah, I can sleep well at night. I don't worry that it, whatever I'm going through, which is nothing really, it's not going to be for naught.
And then you also were able to get a, an expert like Temple Grandin to see the video and to confirm what you saw. Tell us about her participation.
Yes, we go to her with most of our slaughter cases because she is the preeminent expert, and especially with kosher slaughter, she's been into dozens of plants around the world, and she's designed a lot of the systems. So, she really knows everything there is to know about what goes on at these slaughterhouses. So when she says that something is atrocious, it's really kind of the highest source you can get. And she did say that with all three of the Shackle and Hoist cases. She very clearly stated that what was going on there violated all industry and humane guidelines.
And then what was the reaction from Israel? We said that the law has changed now, went into effect at the beginning of June, but
Right.
it took some public pressure. Finally, they did, but was there some doubt that they would ever take action against these companies that import kosher beef to Israel?
Yeah, we took a different tack in the 2016 investigation. We worked with our partners in Israel, not just Anonymous for Animal Rights, but also the group Let the Animals Live, pitched in with legal assistance. And this time, instead of approaching the chief rabbinate, the religious offices, we approached the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs. And that is the agency that oversees the Israeli veterinary services. And they are the ones that have the final, I guess, oversight over imported meat. And so what our partners did was submit a petition to the Supreme Court of Israel, demanding that meat importers be held to world animal health standards. And so they kind of proposed this legal petition, and the Supreme Court then essentially held the veterinary services feet to the fire, and along with the public sending hundreds of thousands of emails to Israeli authorities, resulted in this historic enforcement of a ban on shackle and hoist that went into effect on Friday.
And it really is historic. Huh? I mean, it's not just, another law in the meat industry. I mean, you call it historic for a reason.
It is. I mean, there are over 40 slaughterhouses in many countries in South America that export kosher beef to Israel. So, those plants are all having to scramble and install these more modern slaughter pens that would eliminate the manual manhandling of cattle. And, some of them have already installed the new slaughter pens. Some of them have decided not to do kosher slaughter anymore. And then some of them are in the process of installing them and have had to actually shut down production for a month to switch over all their systems. I mean, it is costing them money to implement these changes, but that's the cost of, not abusing animals.
So do you see any issue with compliance, or do you see any issue with maybe a shortage of beef, and so that maybe Israel may lead, or maybe more people will turn to become vegan and vegetarian in Israel?
Well, actually, Israel has been more progressive than most countries on the issue, and I think I've read that 10% of the population is already vegan. So things are really exploding there. And I mean, some plants have already made the switch to these less cruel methods. So I don't think there'll be a kosher beef shortage. And our next step in terms of what we'd like to see happen is to get the U.S. to follow suit and ban the import of shackle and hoist beef, which they have not yet done.
What are the implications there? If because I presume then there are still some kosher meats that are being imported to the U.S. under shackle and hoist, or what is that?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's currently not prohibited. So, we want an assurance from the OU, the Orthodox Union, which is the largest kosher certifier, that they will not allow that meat into the United States. They had said in 2010 that they would follow Israel's lead, and Israel at the time was allowing shackle and hoisted beef. So now they should follow Israel's lead and ban the importation.
So right now, if you're kosher in America and eating kosher meat, it's not as cool as you think.
Yeah, you could absolutely be, eating, beef from cows who were painfully wrestled to the ground, and it may have experienced prolonged consciousness as a result of the, extra stressful slaughter conditions.
And if more Americans who eat kosher realize that, do you think that would not just turn their stomachs, but change their attitude and maybe force them to speak out against this kind of shackle and hoist method?
Yeah, we hope so. We hope that they will be indignant and, go to PETA.org and take action on our action alert to write to the OU and demand that they make this, that they proclaim that they will not allow the product of cruelty into the country.
What percentage of American Jews who are kosher, follow, who want to eat kosher, are subjected to this kind of meat, or are having this kind of meat that is being processed in this shackle and hoist way?
Right. I mean, kosher is actually much more popular than just people who, observe the rules of kosher. A lot of people think that it's cleaner, or they, I mean, certainly there are things you're not going to get in kosher meat. You're not going to get pig anuses or cow anuses for that matter.
How do people make sure that they're not getting shackle and hoist meat, kosher meat? And how do they make sure that they're getting the best of what, kosher offers?
Well, I mean, we would say, hey, if you're going to be so concerned about what you're eating, let's do the compassionate thing and eat the myriad kosher products that don't involve animal suffering, because there are so many products that are kosher certified that are vegan. But I would say if people are still eating beef, then they should, look to the corporations and hold them accountable and say, are you getting meat from other countries? And how is that meat being killed?
That's Hannah Schein, who with her husband Philip head up an undercover investigations unit that really makes a difference. That new law going into effect June 1st in Israel bans kosher meat processed inhumanely with shackle and hoist methods, a key victory for their efforts. I've worked with investigative reporters all my career, and Hannah and Philip's methods and work was right up there on the level with the best. I was proud to play a small role as the voice of that 2016 video that Hannah and Philip produced. It was the piece that really helped change that law. And now maybe it will spark a change in the U.S. as well. Go to PETA.org and see the video, or click on the podcast note, the link there to see the video. And that's our show for today. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Anil Amok. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. And don't forget, you can always help the animals in PETA, especially if you have Amazon's Alexa. Just say, Alexa, donate to PETA. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.